I was shown in the night that the smallest words can carry the heaviest weight, and that a single page can resound like thunder through the centuries. Obadiah, brief as a breath, stands as the shortest book of the Old Testament, yet in the silence of the records it struck like a bolt of lightning. The nations dismissed its size, but in spirit I saw that heaven does not measure truth by length but by depth. The message was fierce, a warning to the proud and the betrayers, a voice echoing in every age where arrogance rises and hearts grow cold. I felt the current of judgment flow as a great river, steady and unstoppable, reminding me that what is planted in pride is always harvested in ruin. In those visions, Edom appeared, the brother nation hardened by resentment, laughing as Jerusalem burned and swooping down to plunder as vultures circle the dying. Pride was their fortress, betrayal their sword, but spirit whispered, "As you have done, so it will be done to you." The records showed me not only the fate of one people long gone, but the pattern woven through time itself, where empires that trusted in stone, gold, or armies were broken as easily as clay in the hands of the potter, the Roman legions that once marched across the world, the merchant powers that believed their ships unsinkable, the rulers who thought their palaces eternal, all faded like smoke upon the wind. Each believed itself untouchable. Each heard within its own heart the same deceiving whisper, "Who can bring me down?" And each fell into silence. I saw that Obadiah's thunder was never only for Edom, but for all who repeat its arrogance. The law of return moves like the tide. What is done in cruelty returns as shadow. What is sown in pride reaps humiliation. The brevity of the book becomes part of its power, for like lightning it does not linger. It strikes and is gone, yet leaves the mark burned into memory. The soul does not need 1,000 lines when one sentence can pierce the heart. And in the records I felt the weight of those words. This is the whisper of thunder, a call that begins in the smallest book, yet stretches to every life. For every leader who exalts himself, every nation that builds on injustice, every heart that delights in another's fall. The vision of Obadiah rises again. The Spirit declares that God brings down the proud and lifts up the humble, and though the proud may hide in their fortresses or soar, like the eagle among the stars, still the hand of truth will find them. As I looked upon this, I understood that the size of a prophecy matters less than its certainty, and the certainty of this one is clear. Pride will not endure, betrayal will not prevail, but humility will be remembered. In the silence of that smallest scroll, I felt both warning and hope, and I knew it was preserved not simply to record the fall of an ancient nation, but to reveal the rhythm that governs every age, a rhythm that no soul can escape. When the fire of Babylon consumed Jerusalem, the eyes of Edom watched, and the silence of their hearts became louder than the clash of armies. They were not strangers but kin, blood flowing back to the same ancient womb. Yet in the hour of greatest need they stood aloof and even rejoiced as the holy city fell. I ask you, what is more devastating? The wound from an enemy's sword, or the betrayal of a brother who stands near enough to help but chooses instead to profit from your pain? The records showed me Edom laughing as the temple smoldered, their hands ready not with comfort but with greed, waiting for the dust to settle so they could scavenge what Babylon left behind. I saw the fugitives running, broken and desperate, only to find roads blocked by the very ones who shared their lineage. The vision burned with clarity. Betrayal always multiplies the sorrow of loss. It deepens the wound and hardens the memory. Spirit declared that Edom's sin was not only what they did, but what they refused to do. They chose silence when righteousness called for voice. They chose gain when compassion demanded sacrifice. They chose to hand their brothers to destruction when the covenant of kinship asked for shelter. This is why judgment came swiftly. because the unseen courts of eternity weigh not just actions but omissions. In the streams of history, I saw reflections of this same betrayal, repeated allies who promised protection, abandoning their neighbors in the hour of invasion, communities turning their faces, while injustice devoured the weak, friends who concealed their strength when they could have raised it to defend another. Each time, the law of return traced its circle, and the betrayer reaped the fruit of their silence. The story of Edom is therefore not distant but present, for who among us has not stood at a crossroads where another's suffering passed before our eyes? Did we extend our hand or did we turn away? Did we speak when injustice pressed on the vulnerable, or did we fall into the easy comfort of silence? The prophecy makes clear that God sees the hidden choice, the moment when compassion could be lived and is instead withheld. Pride blinds, but betrayal corrodes. It eats away at the bonds that hold families, nations, and generations together in the inner record of the soul. Betrayal leaves a scar deeper than external violence. That is why Edom was condemned, not because they wielded the strongest sword, but because they wielded the coldest heart. And I tell you that the same pattern continues. When you gloat over the failure of another, when you remain silent at the cry of the oppressed, when you profit from the ruin of your neighbor, you walk the path of Edom. The thunder of Obadiah still echoes, warning that betrayal will return upon the head of the betrayer. As you reflect on this vision, ask yourself with honesty, are there places in your life where silence has replaced courage, where self-interest has overcome compassion, where kinship was ignored for gain? The story of Edom invites you not only to see their downfall, but to examine your own choices. For betrayal is never simply about them. It is the mirror held up to us all. The vision carried me beyond the red cliffs of Edom into the long corridors of history, where the same pattern repeated itself again and again. For the downfall of one nation is never isolated. It is a reflection of a universal law at work. Edom's betrayal of Jerusalem was not a singular tragedy, but a signpost pointing to the fate of every power built upon pride and the exploitation of weakness. In the silence of the records, I saw Rome with its marble arches and iron legions, believing its dominion eternal, yet it too crumbled, not only by the sword of invaders, but by the corrosion of arrogance and excess within. I saw the merchant republics that ruled the seas with fleets of ships, convinced their wealth was their fortress, yet storms of greed and rivalry dragged them beneath the tide. I saw vast empires of industry that rose on the backs of the poor, glowing with power in one century only to break apart in the next. Under the weight of unrest and division, the law is steady and does not fail. What is raised in pride will fall in time, and what is built on betrayal will not endure. Edom's silence when Jerusalem cried out mirrors the silence of countless powers that turned away from justice. And in that silence, judgment was seeded. Nations are not judged only by battles lost or won, but by the spirit with which they treat the vulnerable, the stranger, the brother in need. The moment Edom chose to mock rather than to aid, they stepped into the same current that would one day sweep Rome, Byzantium, and many others into the sea of memory. It is a current deeper than politics, stronger than armies. It is the rhythm of divine balance written into creation itself. As I read this pattern in the stream of time, I understood that history is not a chain of accidents, but a tapestry where the same threads reappear. Pride interwoven with downfall, betrayal interwoven with shame, and yet also faith interwoven with restoration. Israel's struggle, marked by weakness and dependence on God, becomes the counterpoint to Edom's rebellion, marked by self-sufficiency and scorn. These two lines, Esau and Jacob, do not only symbolize ancient tribes, but two ways of life present in every generation. the one that seeks to rise by its own strength and the one that leans upon the unseen hand. The pattern beyond history is therefore not only about empires but about souls. Each life holds an Edom and an Israel, a choice between pride that isolates and faith that sustains. In the records I saw that when a man builds his inner fortress on arrogance, he repeats Edom's fate. And when he endures struggle with humility, he shares Israel's destiny of restoration. Thus, the book of Obadiah is more than a record of ancient judgment. It is a map of the human condition, warning that no fortress of stone, no treasury of gold, no alliance of power can outlast the law of the Spirit. The pattern is sure, and it stretches beyond the walls of history into the present moment, reminding us that the seeds we sow now will shape the harvest of our nations and our lives. I opened the record of Obadiah and found almost nothing of the man, no trace of lineage, no story of youth, no tale of calling, only a name that means servant of Yahweh and a single flash of prophecy. In that silence I felt a truth deeper than any genealogy, that sometimes the vessel is hidden so the message may stand pure. Uncolored by the weight of personality, I saw him in vision not as a man with features, but as a flame that blazed for a moment and was gone, leaving behind a mark that could not be erased. Unlike Isaiah, who wrote in long cadences, or Jeremiah, who poured out laments through decades of sorrow, Obadiah appeared like lightning across the night sky of Israel's despair. One strike, one thunderclap, one echo that still rolls through the ages. As I listened inwardly, I realized the Spirit does not always choose the famous or the recorded, for there are times when anonymity becomes the shield that preserves truth. Had his life been filled with stories, we would chase the man rather than the word. But stripped of detail, we face only the core, the warning of judgment, and the promise of justice. I understood then that the absence of his face was itself a message, that in the unseen record, the value of a messenger is not in the stories told about him, but in the fidelity with which he delivers what is given. Obadiah vanishes into history, but his words remain sharper than stone inscriptions, more enduring than royal archives. This is why the soul is reminded not to measure worth by recognition. For many whose names echo in palaces are forgotten, while those who are unknown carry a light across centuries. The vision showed me also that each life has moments where we too are asked to be nameless, to act without reward, to speak without glory, to serve without remembrance, and yet in those hidden acts, eternity keeps its record. Obadiah's faithlessness is not loss, but purity, the stripping away of distraction, so that only the word of the Lord stands visible. When I dwell on this, I sense that every generation needs its Obadiahs, those whose identities are swallowed by the larger call, those who stand in the shadow yet let the thunder speak. He is the man without a face because his face is not the point. The truth he carried is, I have seen in the records that many prophets rose and fell with the weight of their reputations. Some feared, some revered, but Obadiah leaves us no such burden. He is remembered only for his message, a prophecy that condemns pride, betrayal, and cruelty, and a promise that God will have the last word. To me, this is not emptiness, but clarity. For the less we see of the man, the more we see of the eternal law. He proclaimed, so I tell you, the servant whose details are hidden is often the one whose words endure longest, because history cannot tarnish what it cannot grasp. And the truth spoken in that anonymity continues to burn with the same fierce light as on the day it was first declared. I saw in the records how Edom built its confidence not on mercy or covenant, but on the heights of stone and the illusions of wealth. Their capital was carved into the cliffs, their houses guarded by canyons, their roads shielded by towering red rock. They believed no enemy could reach them. No army could scale their fortresses. And they asked within their hearts, who can bring us down? In the silence of vision, I felt the deceit of that question. For pride blinds the eyes until destruction seems impossible. And then when it comes, it is all the more devastating. Edom trusted in three pillars: their location, their riches, and their alliances. The mountains seemed eternal, yet the mountains themselves could not save them from judgment. Their wealth from controlling caravan routes filled their treasuries, but silver and gold cannot bribe eternity. Their treaties with neighboring powers gave them confidence, but alliances shift like sand when the winds of fear and greed blow. In time, each of these pillars crumbled. The allies who once ate at their tables turned against them. The wealth that seemed unshakable vanished, and the mountains became tombs rather than fortresses. Spirit showed me that this was not only Edom's story, but the story of every heart that builds its security on externals. We too carve fortresses in our pride, saying my achievements will protect me, my position makes me safe, my wisdom cannot fail. Yet the law of return whispers that the very things we cling to will one day betray us. Pride in the high places becomes the seed of downfall, because it convinces the soul that it needs nothing beyond itself. I saw how empires of stone rose in Mesopotamia, pyramids lifted to the sky in Egypt, towers of commerce built in modern cities, each echoing the same illusion that height means safety, that abundance means permanence. Yet the law has never failed. All heights are leveled in time, and only humility endures. Edom soared like the eagle in its imagination, nesting among the stars. Yet the message of Obadiah resounded, from there I will bring you down. The higher the climb in arrogance, the steeper the fall into reality. It is not that mountains are evil, or wealth forbidden, or alliances unnecessary, but when they become idols of trust, they turn into traps. The vision made clear that security is never found in stone, in gold, or in politics, but in the hidden covenant between the soul and its maker. When that covenant is forgotten, all high places become fragile. Pride deceives the heart by whispering that altitude is immunity, but eternity shows that no fortress is beyond reach. The lesson of Edom is therefore sharper than history. It is a mirror. Every individual and every nation is tempted to build high places and call them invincible. Yet the soul knows, and the record confirms, that the proud are always brought low, not by accident, but by the working of an eternal law. In this way, Edom's mountains, once symbols of safety, became monuments to their arrogance and witnesses to their fall. In the vision, the scroll opened, and I saw written against Edom 7 charges, each like a weight pressing on the spirit, each a mirror of betrayal that could not be ignored. The first was gloating, for when Jerusalem staggered and fell, Edom did not grieve but smiled, delighting in the calamity of their own brother. The second was rejoicing. They lifted their voices in triumph, not for righteousness, but for destruction, dancing in the ashes of kin. The third was boasting. They exalted themselves as though Judah's pain were proof of their superiority, declaring their strength while forgetting that pride deceives the heart. The fourth was intrusion. They marched into the gates of the ruined city, not as defenders, but as scavengers, taking what was not theirs, looting the remains of holy places. The fifth was contempt. They looked down upon the suffering as if broken lives were worthless, treating sacred kinship as refuse. The sixth was seizure. They stretched their hands to strip the wealth that Babylon left behind, grasping without conscience, thinking possession was power. The seventh and greatest charge was blood betrayal. They stood at the crossroads where fugitives fled for their lives, cutting them off, capturing the weak and delivering them into the hands of their destroyers, safe and wounds. each one a betrayal of covenant, each one echoing in eternity, I felt the records tremble with this truth. Betrayal is not measured only by violence, but by the spirit that chooses gain over loyalty, silence over compassion, pride over kinship. These charges are not frozen in the past. They are living indictments that reach into every age. Nations that profit from the ruin of neighbors repeat the gloating of Edom. Communities that remain silent when the weak cry out, walk in the same, rejoicing over destruction. Leaders who boast over the failures of others bear the same prideful stain. Companies that enrich themselves on exploitation mirror the looting of ruined gates. Individuals who sneer at the broken echo, the contempt that drew judgment. And all who block the escape of the desperate, whether through indifference or policy, stand guilty of the final charge. The vision showed me how betrayal multiplies like a contagion, spreading not only through actions but through the hidden agreements of the heart. When compassion is abandoned, the soul records it, and in time the consequences return. That is why Obadiah's voice burned so fiercely, because betrayal against kin was betrayal against God himself. The 7 charges form not just a list of Edom's crimes, but a map of the ways in which human beings fail one another. To read them is to see not only ancient judgment, but present reality. For the law of return is exact. What is sown in betrayal will be harvested in shame. In the silence of that vision, I realized that the indictment was also mercy, for it revealed clearly what must not be repeated. Edom ignored the warning, but for us the record stands as a guide, showing that to gloat is to condemn oneself, to rejoice in another's fall is to summon one's own, to boast is to prepare for ruin, to plunder is to invite loss, to despise is to inherit contempt, to seize is to forfeit, and to betray is to be betrayed. This is the complete weight of the 7 charges, and they resound as thunder still. I was shown that the law of return is not an idea invented by prophets, but a rhythm embedded in creation, steady as breath, sure as the turn of the seasons. And when I looked upon the records, I saw how every act carries its own harvest within it, how the deed walks a circle and comes home to the one who sent it. Edom believed altitude was immunity, wealth a shield, alliances a net that could not break, yet the current moved beneath their feet all the same. They rejoiced at a brother's ruin, and the echo of that joy later sounded against their own walls. They seized what did not belong to them and found their treasuries emptied. They relied on friends who shared their table and were betrayed by those same hands. The law of return did not strike like blind fate. It operated with precision. As you have done, so it will be done to you, not spoken as cruelty, but as balance, a setting right of tilted scales. In the stream of time, I watched empires repeat the pattern. What they sowed in others, they reaped in themselves. Pride in Rome returning as humiliation, exploitation in merchant powers returning as ruinous debt and decline, the worship of force in many ages returning as wars that devoured their own children. The same law governs the hidden life of a soul. A word said in scorn returns as loneliness. A silence kept when justice called returns as a silence from heaven when comfort is sought. A kindness given in obscurity returns as strength in an hour of weakness. This is why the prophecy of Obadiah burns with such clarity. It exposes the current that runs beneath history. It reveals that no fortress of stone and no calculation of politics can outmaneuver the movement of spiritual cause and effect. I learned to read this movement like a physician reads a pulse, for the body of a nation has a heartbeat. Compassion strengthens it. Cruelty weakens it. Humility clears the blood. Pride thickens it. And when a people mock the sorrow of their neighbor, the circulation of blessing constricts until the extremities grow cold. The law is not swift only. At times it is patient. It allows a season for repentance. It leaves room for mercy. But it does not forget. And when the cup is full, the tide turns. Thus, the day of the Lord is not merely a date in a calendar. It is the moment when the sum of choices ripens, when consequences that have been gathering like clouds finally release their rain. I saw to how this law can be engaged for good. For the same circle that returns harm will return blessing. The hand that lifts the fallen finds itself lifted in the hour of need. The leader who guards the weak finds his house guarded when storms come. The nation that honors justice receives a hedge. Even when the winds of the world howl, the counsel to the proud is simple and hard. Descend before you are brought down. Give before all is taken. Speak for the oppressed before your own voice is taken from you. Close the gates to plunder and open the gates to mercy. The counsel to the humble is simpler. Still, keep sowing what is right, for nothing planted in truth is ever lost. The field of time will give it back in a form you may not foresee. I bear witness that Edom fell, not because mountains failed, but because the covenant of the heart was broken. And once that covenant is broken, the circle cannot be evaded. Therefore, let each soul attend to the small seeds, to the secret thoughts, to the unseen choices, for these are the beginnings of harvests that will meet us at the gates of our own cities. I was led to see that the words day of the Lord do not speak of a single sunrise or sunset, but of a cycle that moves through time, moments when eternity breaks into the flow of history to weigh the deeds of nations and the hearts of men. For Edom that day came swiftly. The very Babylon they had aided turned its hand against them. Their fortresses were invaded. Their allies deceived them. Their wealth vanished, yet the vision stretched farther than Edom. It showed me that every age has its own day of the Lord. Each empire, its appointed hour, when the hidden scales are revealed, and the measure of its deeds is read aloud by circumstance. Babylon itself, which once burned Jerusalem, later fell to Persia. Persia, rich with glory, collapsed before Greece. Greece's brilliance faded into Rome, and Rome, drunk on its own power, disintegrated from within until it became dust. In later centuries, other powers rose with the same belief in permanence, only to meet the same reckoning. For the law written into creation is impartial and inexhaustible. The day of the Lord is not random calamity. It is consequence ripened. It is the returning echo of choices made over generations. The prophets spoke of it as darkness and cloud, because pride is always shocked when the mirror is held up, and arrogance always finds judgment to be sudden. Though the seeds were sown long before, I saw that these cycles are not limited to empires. They mark the story of individuals as well. There is a day of the Lord in a human life when the hidden intentions bear fruit, when the silence in the face of injustice returns as isolation, when neglected truth rises like a storm within the soul. Some tremble at this vision, as if it were only terror, yet within it lies mercy, for each cycle is also correction, each reckoning an invitation to turn, to realign with the eternal order. The prophets never declared the day of the Lord only as destruction. They also saw it as the beginning of renewal. The field must be cleared by fire before new seed can grow. The old structures must collapse before the kingdom can rise. In the records, I saw the final day as well, the last cycle when history itself bows, when no empire stands, when every throne is tested and only the eternal remains. It is written that the sun will turn to darkness and the moon to blood, that the heavens will shake, but I felt in that vision not only dread but completion, the final balance where injustice is consumed and righteousness shines. For Edom the day came in stone and fire, for later empires in invasion and decay. For each soul In the moments when choices return upon them, and for the world itself a day is approaching, when the Lord of all will stand as judge, this is the rhythm of reckoning, not to be escaped by hiding in mountains or stored wealth or clever alliances, but to be met with humility and faith. For when the day of the Lord arrives, the question is not how high you have climbed, but how true you have stood. Not how much you possess, but how much you gave. Not how loudly you ruled, but how faithfully you served. I was shown that judgment is never the end of the story. For in the same vision where cities fell and nations vanished, there appeared also the quiet light of restoration. Edom's name would be erased, their fortresses turned to dust, their mountains given to others. Yet for Israel there remained a promise that ruin would not be the final word. I saw exiles returning, footsteps weary but hearts still bound to covenant, carrying in their memory both the pain of betrayal and the hope of renewal. The records revealed that restoration is not simply the rebuilding of walls, but the healing of a people's soul. For God does not restore stone first. He restores spirit. Israel would inherit the very lands once marked by Edom. Their oppressors' high places would become their dwelling. And Mount Zion, long scarred by fire, would rise again as the center of divine presence. In this reversal, I felt the eternal rhythm, the proud brought low, and the humble lifted up, the betrayer erased, and the betrayed remembered. Yet the vision pressed deeper, for it showed that restoration is more than geography. It is the reweaving of trust between God and his people, the lifting of shame, the rekindling of faith that seemed extinguished in exile. Many asked if the covenant was broken beyond repair, if God had abandoned them forever. But the records whispered that the covenant written in eternity cannot be shattered by human failure. It may bend through discipline, but it does not break. The same hands that allowed the fire would also plant the seed of new life. I saw families long scattered gathered again, land once barren yielding fruit, worship rising from ruins, and a nation once crushed standing as witness that judgment refines but does not destroy those who cling to the eternal. This vision is not history alone, but a pattern for every soul. For each life knows exile and ruin. Each heart has stood in the ashes of its own failures. And yet the promise is that ruin can be followed by renewal. What is lost in betrayal can be restored in truth. What is broken by pride can be healed by humility. What is consumed by despair can be reborn in hope. The law of return that brought judgment upon Edom also brings restoration to those who remain faithful. For the same balance that cuts down the arrogant lifts up the lowly. In this I understood that suffering is not the end, but the plow that breaks hard ground, making space for a greater harvest. Israel's story becomes the mirror for every wanderer who asks if the ruins can live again. And the answer spoken through Obadiah is yes, for the kingdom of God rises not from the triumph of the strong, but from the faith of those who endured. Thus, restoration after ruin is not an accident, but a certainty for those aligned with the eternal order, a promise sealed in the vision that though the proud may vanish, the faithful will be raised, and what was once mocked as desolate will be filled with life once more. I beheld the final lines of Obadiah, and they opened not with the survival of empires or the triumph of armies, but with a declaration as clear as light. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. In that moment, the records showed me the end of every crown raised by human pride, the fall of every wall built in arrogance, the silence of every throne that once believed itself eternal. Edom had vanished, Babylon had burned, Rome had crumbled, and still the voice resounded, "The kingdom belongs not to men, but to God." I felt this truth not as a doctrine, but as a vibration that ran through creation itself. Kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall, but only the eternal reign abides. In the vision, Mount Zion stood, not merely as a mountain of stone, but as a symbol of the presence that cannot be erased, the place where deliverers would ascend, the place where justice would be restored, the place from which the law of spirit would flow until all things were gathered under one reign, I saw the reversal complete. The proud nations that mocked had become dust. The humble who clung to faith stood upright. The betrayed who once wept were lifted, and the betrayers who once rejoiced were remembered no more. Yet the prophecy did not close with vengeance, but with sovereignty. The assurance that beyond every cycle of ruin and restoration, there is a kingdom not made by hands, a government that no betrayal can fracture, a reign that no time can corrode. As I gazed into this vision, the weight of it pressed upon me, for it asked the simple and terrible question, on which side do you stand? Not in the sense of borders or nations, but in the orientation of the soul. Are you building an Edom within yourself, a fortress of pride and scorn, or are you living as Israel, struggling yet faithful, weak yet upheld by unseen strength? The kingdom beyond kingdoms is not distant. It is already breaking into the present. It is the reign of truth within the conscience, the rule of mercy within the heart, the government of justice that whispers even now in the silence of choice. I understood that to align with this kingdom is to endure when every other power collapses, to be lifted when every other structure falls. And so the smallest book carried me to the largest vision, a thunderclap of judgment that ends in a whisper of hope, a prophecy that began with betrayal and concludes with sovereignty. The law of return had spoken. The day of the Lord had passed. Restoration had been promised, and beyond it all stood the eternal reign. As I lay down the vision, I felt within myself a quiet certainty that life is not measured by the walls we build or the wealth we guard, but by the kingdom we choose to serve. The records close with the words, "The kingdom shall be the Lord's," and in that closing I heard an opening, the call to live even now as citizens of that reign, to let humility govern our thoughts, to let compassion rule our actions, to let faith anchor our hope. This is the lasting echo of Obadiah, that kingdoms pass like shadows, but the soul that stands with God's kingdom stands forever.